Hello, Rantboxtv viewers and listeners. Today we're here for part 2 of our discussion of the importance of narratives in the modern era. Today I'm joined once again by John, Ola and Olie, and we're going to expand on some of the ideas we touched upon last time. Rantboxtv is a weekly podcast where we try and bring together people of a diverse mindset to talk about things in a constructive manner. And it's something I'm rather fond of. I hope you enjoy the discussion. So, last time, where did we end up? We were talking about how stories affect the conversation in the modern context. We're talking about superheroes as exemplars for representation and as a kind of a consumable morality model and symbol of authority. And also we're talking about the ideas of, are some people inherently bad? Do we need obvious heroes and villains? And how does that affect how we see stories in the modern day? So leading on for that, what I want to take us in the direction of is, how does representation in storytelling affect the public conversation? Ola, I believe you had some ideas.
Okay, well, actually, hello, Rantbox people. Yes, I do. I want to talk about how representation in storytelling is affecting the dominative narrative. And I want to actually go back to something that me and John discussed in a previous episode. We were talking about how music was very masculine, even shoegaze. Like the guitar is the ultimate masculine symbol. And I've been watching something that I think has been challenging this narrative. Thus, you can see behind me, I have lady parts. Have you guys heard of lady parts at all? Yeah. John, you have? Okay. So this is a TV series about a all-girl, all-Muslim punk band. And that really is taking a turn on the whole macho punk white male narrative of rock and roll, because I think rock and roll can be quite white as well. And I don't feel like, it's more like, oh, well, if you're going to be, like a lot of Afro-Caribbean people will be into like urban music and stuff like that. So this is a really interesting tale about taking that symbol, that guitar symbol, that symbol of the man that's always been within the music industry, and then giving it not only, it's not that new all-girl band, but here we have even a better twist. Brown, Muslim, all-girl band from this perspective. Because these are people within our society in the UK that I feel doesn't get that much airtime, doesn't get that much representation properly. And they're like, it's great because it embraces English culture and Muslim culture and rock and roll. You know what I mean? It's like, finally we're seeing a fusion of cultures rather than, oh yeah, it's just a bunch of old white guys into punk music kind of thing. That's why I chose this particular picture of the girls. Yeah, the one in the full hijab, she's the band manager. I'm starting to think that she totally rocks the look with fingerless gloves as well. And she's just sitting there going like this. If anybody hasn't watched it, I totally recommend Lady Parts. It's so much fun. It touches on the politics, but it's also really fun. It's easy, but it's also challenging, but it's not threatening at the same time. It's a good balance between these things. And that, I think this is one of the best UK TV series representations of challenging the dominative narrative here that I've seen in a really long time. I know there's a couple of other things that I haven't seen, but this is more up my street with the rock and roll angle. And I think it just subverts it and says, well, yeah, we're English. This is our bag too. Welcome us. Okay, so anybody want to challenge me?
Prove me wrong.
No, anybody want to challenge or add to the thoughts in this, or have their own represent? John, what do you have to say?
Yeah, we don't normally see shows where there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different characters who happen to follow the same religion, who are in the context of a industry or trying to attempt to become part of an industry, which is obviously white male dominated. So that in itself as a concept has a lot of potential. I want to see more of it before I talk about it, but I'd be very happy at some point to do a talk about a particular episode or the series in general. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I've never heard of it before. This is the first time. It looks incredible. It's definitely something I'd check out.
Well, I think what happens is it brings out the humanity. I really think that we have this conception of female Muslims, and that they're like nuns, or they're not human, or they're kind of dressed up in whatever they're wearing, and as some kind of armor or something. And here you get to see their backstories, how they deal with certain religious obligations, and the different ideas about what is Muslim, because it's she's this one with the guitar is trying to going on dating. He's trying to, but it's like not dating, it's like find a husband app. And and you're seeing her and this guy, like, it's really funny, like the different men that she's coming across, and well, okay, there's some differences, but then it's got a rom-com feeling that could just be Hugh Grant-y in a way, except it's like they came up with a song, Bashir with a beard, about it was just like, this guy, he was gonna, he said we're gonna date, and she only gets into the band because she wants to date the drummer's brother. That's kind of how this goes. And he kind of, it doesn't work out at first, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's where they came up with the song Bashir with a beard. Yeah, John.
I have a question which you've inspired, Ola, which
Okay.
I'm thinking maybe Olie may want to jump in on, because so far he's just been patiently sitting there thinking, I don't know what he's thinking. I'm no fucking psychic. Anyway, this is what I'm thinking. One of the most prominent authors of the Western media's, say, bias towards Muslims would probably be George Bush. And so I'd like to know what Olie thinks of that statement, and just in general, how you're doing.
Well, wait, which George Bush, Jr. or Senior?
Well, let's go for Junior. I think he was the last one to really, truly transform that narrative in the way that we know it. We could obviously go further back, but as far as everyone is going to think of, the first go-to point would be the last war, so to speak.
Sweet. Make it easy for me, man. Thanks very much. So yeah, hey, Rantbox guys. So I think there's one thing I wanted to say just before we do jump onto that, which is that the one thing about this series that I absolutely love is that myself, quite frequently, and with Barbarella's Bang Bang Crew, we spend a lot of time playing in a place called the Bird's Nest in Deptford, which if you're a Londoner and you haven't been there, you should go there, because it is the most adorable freak show in all of London, and I love it, and I hope it never dies. But the one thing is that while this concept may seem like a comedy, it may seem like a sort of what if situation. That's real. Like, that's the kind of thing you would see in that place. Like, this is the kind of experience that you get, and these bands are real. So it's funny when you watch like something which is ostensibly about bands. Like, this is a film about a rock band, and they're all white guys who sound and look like me. And you're like, no, that's not the majority of bands in London, that's for sure. Not in East London, like, not at all. Like, so it's funny to see that. Like, everyone's like, oh, it's such an imaginative. It's like, no, dude, that's like Tuesday night in Deptford. Go out and experience it. Some of it's fantastic. That being said, W and Senior, because to be honest, they're a little bit interchangeable on this thing. I think there's an interesting part. So, wow, such a huge deal. There's I guess, to go back to narrative, the power of narrative there is that the United States needs an enemy at all times. Like, regardless of how you feel, it's a highly militaristic country. It's the most militaristic country in the world, I think. It's a close tie with somewhere like, say, I don't know, Israel. But they are very, their mindset is very militaristic. It's very aggressive. Guns are in the culture, so on. It's not something you think of very often, but it's true. Trouble with that is when you've got a gun, you have to point it somewhere. If there's a gun in the first act, it has to be used in the third act, or it shouldn't be there at all. So the trouble is that if you need an enemy, where are you going to find one? Well, you can't point it at what is currently the real enemy and what may have been the real enemy all along, which is domestic terrorists. But you can point it at Muslims because they are alien and external and strange, and they happen to be sitting on top of a ton of stuff that we need. So, you know, there's an element there where, to be honest, I think even at the time, I remember as a kid with September 11th, after that and the years after that, watching that narrative unfold, going, is it just me? Or are we like crapping really hard on these people for no reason? Like, is it their turn? Who decides that it's their turn? Like, that sucks.
I do want to interrupt about this because I think it was quite an atrocity what happened 9/11. You basically had planes blowing up 2 skyscrapers. It wasn't, I'm not justifying what happened, but it was an attack on, because whenever America's been involved in wars, it's not actually happened on their soil. So when this occurred, and then the narrative, went this way, I think it really it was more brutal. And yes, everything that you say is absolutely right, Ollie. I totally agree with you. They need an enemy, and this was very convenient. It was like dropping a bomb onto New York and Washington, D.C. You know what I mean?
But it's one of those things where you find yourself thinking, in the liberal, open-minded countries that we ostensibly live in, it's strange to take the acts of a few nut jobs and then ascribe them to an entire group of people for years on end. It's okay
I totally agree.
It's one thing to be angry for a short period of time, and I understand that, but like, I think it comes down to, you can't keep doing that for what is now 20 years, 2 decades. You can't keep doing that with a straight face. It's just
if you're going to be totally honest, you have to link that to McCarthyism, the story of McCarthyism, the communist story, and now we still have this going on. There's a dual narrative in Washington about whether Trump won the election. You have there's 2 different versions to reality now. There's not one single version in the U.S. and that right-wing agenda, whether it's McCarthyism, whether it's George W. Needing an enemy, that's still going on and actually being very detrimental to the U.S. right now. Speaking of storytelling, that Trump QAnon narrative, that's scary.
For sure. I mean, definitely, it's funny how that narrative is now turned inwards. Obviously, where we are at now. I think there's an interesting thing there as well, where, as you say, there's a story there, but there's a large part of that story with, obviously, with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and going to the Middle East again, if you can call it again, where a lot of that was, funnily enough, the story just cycling in on itself and making things worse, and a lot of false intelligence and a lot of people who wanted to hear what they want to hear, and Tony Blair really wanting to hear what he wanted to hear and not hearing people tell him the truth, which is, I mean, who knows what happened there. I've lost my chain of thought here. John, do you want to jump in?
Sorry.
Well, I do have one thing to say before I'm sure we move on, because there's quite a bit to cover. Just so I'm sure, Matt, can you read out that first question again, so I know that this next idea isn't like a super fucking tangent?
No worries. Yeah, so the original question was, once again, how is representation in storytelling affecting the public conversation?
Okay, so this could be halfway towards a super fucking tangent, but hey, this is what we do. So I was doing a shoot not too long ago, and I was talking to one of the actors about representation in media post the pandemic. Now, I think that there seems to be 2 different kinds of reality that you can choose when you're creating a story now in film, let alone in music video. You can either choose to ignore the fact that the pandemic happened, and so therefore you get rid of conversations, anxiety, masks, all of that, or you fall into the simulacra of what the world was before it. And I'm not sure if you can really fall back into that old one in a comfortable way, because then you're obscuring all the social intricacies that are occurring now that people having to deal with that anxiety will obviously relate to. So that form of, say, representation, not necessarily to do with marginalized group, but a whole, ecosystem, I think that needs some kind of addressing by people who are making stories now in popular media, not just in film or TV, but in comics, in books. I'm not sure if we can easily go back to writing for that old world with a straight face.
Well, you guys, they didn't mention anything in Lady Parts about it at all. I'm wondering, do you think they filmed it before?
Good.
I don't know if they did or didn't.
This is the question I'm constantly asking myself when I watch anything now. It's like, when was this filmed? What are they going to film in their next season? Will they suddenly have a pandemic? Will they suddenly show bits of it in a dialogue? Will people in the background be wearing masks? I'm not scared is too big a word, but I'm quite concerned that there will be a weird kind of, as I said, crossroads where people either go hard one way and say, look, yeah, it definitely happened, or like, no, it didn't happen, here's your escape. But if you're going to be talking about heavy duty conversational topics like, say, sexism, racism, what have you, if you're forgetting the context it's in, then I think you're doing a certain disservice towards the idea of it being a certain reality. Not that you can have reality on screen or in a medium. There's always going to be several layers of hyper reality. But to ignore that major thing, that major crisis that we're still going through, for me, it's still 2020. So
yeah, absolutely.
No. I'm glad it's 2021. I want things.
Take me with you. Where's Marty?
I went to Worthing, and I went to Eastbourne, and I went to Hastings. I got out.
There's time machines in Hastings. Okay, I'll be right back. Hold on.
Yeah.
It's 2021. It's June. I'm here. Hi.
Just go for a day trip out of London, man, and go out to eat. That really makes it feel almost real. Just go out to eat. Have a drink. Just do that. It's good.
To come back to the question a little bit, like on both that subject of representation of the pandemic and representation of, am I right in saying it was a female punk band in Female Parts? Is that right?
All Muslim. It's all Muslim, all female. They're right behind me.
No. I said, is it? Did you say it was a punk band?
Yeah, punk. It's punk.
It's
punk rock.
Like that, I think punk is important there, especially because it's set in the UK. Because in both of these ideas, like what you choose to include and not include in your narrative affects the way that subject is absorbed by people who consume that. Like punk specifically, as well as being very male, is very, very British, incredibly British. So to have all-female Muslim band who are punk it feels like a certain attempt to redefine how we perceive Britishness, which I think is worth pulling at, because especially like Olie said, in London, it's not actually that unusual. People consuming it might look at it and be like, oh, you're just appeasers, you're just virtue signalers. But then you go to a diverse location, it's like, shit, there's like 5 of these bands are just in the local vicinity. Like they're not as rare as people like to think they are. It's just about the popular narrative we consume. And then similarly, with the idea of presenting the pandemic, like I think there's a certain argument for not showing it because people are just so exhausted, they're so tired, they don't need more of it. But at the same time, in a way, not ever addressing, like I do hope we start to see it come out into our narratives, because if we never discuss it, then we allow, like there's so much controversy about, oh, do lockdowns work? Do vaccines work? Do masks work? Like all this stuff. And it's like, if you don't allow those ideas to come together in a narrative and be challenged in a free-form way, then you never see the two different ideas interact. And there's a difference between a debate where, especially when it's a manufactured debate, and you've got two people who strongly disagree with each other, and they just yell at each other for 5 minutes, and then you change the channel or whatever. Like there's a difference between that and telling a story where you have people who physically have to coexist because of the conditions of the story. Because when that happens, you actually create new ideas. And I think, you know, both of those things play interesting roles in how we change what the public conversation is through storytelling.
I have something to add to that, Matthew. I just want to say that the people who wrote it basically, Lady Parts is based on a real punk, like the woman who wrote it about her experiences as a Muslim. I think she's a Muslim. I don't know, but like this is based on someone's real experiences who wrote the TV series. So and this goes back to what Olie said. Hey, I was down in South London, and there's loads of this stuff going on that never gets said, and you know that creativity, that mixed culture of London with bands and the different kind of, and you know, representations within it. You know, it's real, it's happening. And so, but interestingly enough, none of the cast are Muslim. You know, so I don't know what that says or doesn't say. And I want to talk about the COVID thing just briefly, about the storytelling. I get why some people would want to see that. I don't. I'm so glad that in fact, even when I watched Flash come back, and Flash didn't actually deal with the story, but I could see that, like, the main guy, what's his name, Grant, he looked depressed on set. In fact, he was miserably. I feel like these guys have had a terrible lockdown. I could really feel it in the atmosphere on the show, even though they didn't touch upon this in the storyline. It was really sad. Grant looked sad. I mean, just like, oh no, man, I'm already locked down. I don't want to see you sad. You're the Flash, man. You make me happy. So I'm not ready. I personally, I'm not ready. I want to give it 2 years of like freedom, and then I can look at the social implications, because I've lived through it, and it's when you're that depressed that
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Like, I do feel like, to a certain extent, definitely, like, even if I'm ready to consume that kind of stuff, I do feel like it's too soon to be dominating the narrative when we're not even out of it yet. If you have you know, like, I completely understand. I'm not saying that tomorrow I want there to be a Hollywood blockbuster movie about, you know, like that's not what I'm saying at all. Because yes, I completely agree with you. Like, just in terms of people's morale, it would be...
Just to be a bit more clear, I'm not saying that the subject matter should be the pandemic. It's just that it should be part of the context of the story. That's all.
Yeah.
I find that even, sorry, one last thing. I just find that even though the storyline isn't dealing with it, I can feel the undertones of people when TV series come back, like The Flash. I'm feeling this mise en scene thing, you know, this darkness underneath. Sorry, Alec, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, well, one thing is that you always know when Grant Gustin is like sad, because whenever he delivers a line, he bobbles his head. Like, just watch it. Next time you watch The Flash, I promise you, he'll be like, bobbles. He's a lovely guy, I'm sure. The one thing I was going to say, actually, just from a purely practical perspective, the one thing that has actually really interested me during this is that obviously everyone's filming stuff coming up to the pandemic. They've written all their plots, they've written all their stuff, and then everything has stopped and all the production has ceased and everything's kind of run out. And we've had a year of not doing any kind of filming, any kind of, you know, like on-set work. It's just effects and sound stages and stuff. And now we come back after the pandemic and we can now start shooting on location and shooting on sets and doing things as we once did, at least in the UK. And you think, well, in a way, we sort of just stopped making stuff in that year and change, you know, like, so how do you kind of casually slot that in? Do you just, you know, because if, I don't know, can anyone here tell me like something like EastEnders, which is obviously on a rolling, constant filming basis, did that carry on during the pandemic? Did they involve masks in that?
I've known that. I want to say this because EastEnders continued, because I know people who've worked on it, and but they, instead of filming the normal, I think it's like they filmed less days. But now I think it's back to normal. And I have an actor friend who filmed in Ireland during the pandemic. He went to Ireland, and you know, there was tests, and you know, like, Matt, I don't know. I think he was just tested before he got on set, and then they isolated. Well, you know, he was playing a Viking somewhere in Ireland. But like, and there, you know, that Josh Whedon TV series that just came out, The Nevers. That was filmed during the pandemic. There's actually quite a few things have been filming because I've been watching them. And
There's
the Nevers was one of them.
Sorry. There's definitely been...
the Nevers... Ollie, you say what you gotta say.
I was gonna say, there's definitely been some video of like I think it was Tom Cruise, like filming during the pandemic because was it Tom Cruise? One of you guys.
It was Tom Cruise. It was.
Where he was like,
got angry.
He got super angry because it was like, this is the thing we're filming and everyone's watching to see if this works. And I was like, you're watching it going, okay, Hollywood tantrum, but then you're like, actually, this guy's got kind of a point, like maybe we should, I was actually sort of like, yeah, carry on, Tom Cruise. You do that. You rant out. You do a Christian Bale on them. I think that's good. Sorry, you were saying.
I believe the Nevers, I know they were filming during the pandemic because they had a scene where they were going to hang one of the characters. And they were going to film it somewhere in Greenwich in that historical bit. And then they said, in the end, they just built their own set for the hanging and spread the extras out to make it look like there's more. Like they basically said they were, how they had done this hanging scene so I think they filmed the whole thing during the pandemic pretty much. It was filmed in London during the pandemic. So I think there was quite a bit of filming going on. Just if they had the money, you'd test and you'd isolate. It would be probably a small crew and kind of thing. So there was filming going on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we, especially with big production houses, they kind of have an incentive to keep going, and what do you call it? Necessity is the mother of invention, So like, where there's a will, there's a way, I guess. But on the subject of heroic narratives, I think it's quite a good segue to get into the ideas around storytelling and authoritarianism, especially when we're talking about heroism, because in a lot of these stories, we are taking somebody who is kind of an exemplar, kind of a person to look up to and a role model. And because of that, there are certain ideas that are being handed out from that mode of storytelling. And based on our previous episode, John, I believe you had something to say in that realm.
Well, this is the thing, Matt. I don't remember exactly what it is I had to say. But I do know someone who has a thing to say about this particular topic, just based on what they said off camera. So, Ollie, take it away.
Okay. So I think it's interesting that I'm saying interesting again. I've got to stop doing that. It's really cool that we're talking about authoritarianism in general. I think we mentioned fascism before, as we were talking about before we came on today. And obviously, Matt rightly pointed out that fascism is a bit of a dog whistle and it's hard to get away from certain interpretations. So instead, authoritarianism and sort of the exercise of power is an interesting thing. Oh, I did it again.
Wait, Ollie, I just love how thrilled you are. Fascism! Yeah!
I know. Space Nazis again.
Space Nazis, one more time.
So, yeah. One thing I would say is that authoritarianism is a interesting facet of this whole thing, because away from comic books and away from sort of intentional story, away from fiction, there's an element of storytelling in real life, the sort of narratives that we produce for our real existence. I think we mentioned before about how narratives are very important for social cohesion and coherence, and having a narrative as a group is important in order to progress as a society, which is true. However, that is a two-edged sword. It's a dangerous thing to do. The absolute master of breaking this down is Adam Curtis, who I believe, again, we mentioned before. He has a brilliant series on BBC iPlayer at the moment called Can't Get You Out of My Head, which is all about this very subject. But as a lot of his previous work discusses it as well. And I think the one takeaway that I've had from it really is that stories are important, but you've got to be careful where and how you use them and when you say stop, if in fact you can say stop, because you end up with things like, like Boris Johnson and then Brexit and all the various terrible things. I said the B word, sorry everyone, that are sold on a story, which is a fiction, sold on a Britain which does not exist. But we're told could exist or did exist even when it did not. But nowhere more is that more present right now, I think, is with the heroic narrative, is with the statue debate. I'm not sure if we've come across a statue debate on Rantbox before. And I don't want to, it's a bit hackneyed. But there was an excellent point raised to me about the statue thing, which is, for instance, Cecil Rhodes. At the moment, I don't know if you've seen any of the coverage for that and his statue outside Orioles, but a lot of people are arguing about removing it. I think a lot of people want to remove it. 150 professors are on strike right now because they think it should be removed. And a lot of people are saying, well, look, like, why should we remove it as history? We also have the Rhodes Scholarship. Should we take that away too? And my point has always been there, well, look, what story does that statue tell? What narrative does that statue create? That statue of Churchill in Parliament Square, or Nelson Mandela, that statue of Colston that was ripped down. What do those statues imply to you? What is the story that it tells when you have Cecil Rhodes looking like the love child of Jesus and Abraham Lincoln hanging over the door every time you walk in? What does that say? It says that this man is a hero and he's setting the example that we need to follow. But that is wrong. And people at the time said it was wrong. So John's got something to say. Carry on, John.
Just because you're right, it could be a hackneyed route of investigation, but I'm just going to say this because otherwise if I don't, I'll feel wrong and bitter inside. But if you destroy or take down a statue, it's not like a Doctor Who plot where there's like a hole in space and like someone has to come along and plug it in. History will always be there. There are books, there's the fucking internet. You know, take these statues that you so love, people who want to protect this Britain that never existed, and shove it up your ass.
But this is the perfect thing, is exactly what you say, because with Colston and how he is now displayed lying on his back, covered in graffiti, and now the debate is, should we leave the graffiti on? And I'm like, well, if you want to preserve history, damn right you should. Like, yeah, you should leave him lying down, because now he doesn't look like a hero. He looks like a pillock. And that's kind of what we're after. You know, it's like, look, there he is, there he was, that's where he was, that's where he is now, and this is what we think of him. Like, he's not going anywhere. History isn't going to evaporate. You know, yeah. But you've got to be careful with those
I really
stories.
want to add... Okay,
Carry on.
I want to add something to your statue thing. And actually, your statue idea actually goes back to the first thing about how representations dominate narrative. You remember when the Colston statue went down, and then suddenly there was a white dude who popped up that statue of that one of the BLM women. He created a artwork in place of him. He did it really quick, whipped it up and stuck her up, and there she was. And I was so, there was somebody who complained about this. Like, I'm not going to say who, but like online, somebody complained about this, saying that, you know, it was a white guy and he was usurping this and na. And it was just kind of like the woman whose image was used was absolutely thrilled. She posed for the statue, and it was actually based on a photo of her. And there she appeared, and then they took it down. She was there for like, I don't know, 3 or 4 days. But what I loved, that is another narrative usurping the main narrative. Like, we have this slave trading guy, suddenly he's ripped down and thrown down, and people are stomping at it to show you we didn't like slave trade. And then we have a regular, I was thrilled because one, she was a woman and there's very few female statues out there to begin with. And two, this was just she was like a Black Panther to me. I know it's Black Lives Matter rather than Black Panther, but that's who she was. She was a real person, somebody I aspire to be. I related to her. It wasn't about white or black. It was just about an activist. A regular person got the spotlight, not some fucking toff, some rich guy who made tons of money off the backs of people, but just that person in Bristol who wanted to stand up for something. And she was a mom, and she was just like a regular person, and she was beautiful. You saw the statue of her. She was just gorgeous, and so you ever notice this about white dude statues? They're ugly as shit. White slave trades and the wigs, and they're just fucking ugly, really ugly. So she was just stunning and real, and that to me was a big point when a narrative, an underclass narrative, shall we say, came up and became dominant. Only for like 2 seconds because they had to take it down. But I wanted her to stay, you know, because she represents me, not whatever that guy, Colston, whatever, slave trading Bristol guy. And I just thought to myself, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if anybody else got excited when she popped up, but I was really excited. I was just like, you know, that's the other, this is the other Britain that doesn't get shown. This is the, you know, the majority, not the minority that seem to have everything, but just regular people doing their thing, resisting, being a mom too. You know, she wasn't famous for anything particular except being an activist and being a mom. Beautiful. Okay.
Absolutely. I think what you said there is incredibly cogent, and it's interesting how this kind of ties both subjects together, because when we talk about representation, part of the thing we're talking about here is how history is told by the victors, right? Because who we choose to lionize in the form of a statue is based upon whose version of history we want to tell, essentially. But then adding into that, with the idea of authoritarianism, who owns the square where the statue lives? Who has the right of control over it, and why is another very interesting question. Because is it right that we just allow governmental bodies and local councils to just decide to plonk things down, or should the actual people who live in that community have more of a say in who we choose to lionize?
Yeah, and those of us who pay outrageous council tax, fuck this Colston, fuck, man, bring me back the other statue.
John, you look like you had something to say just then.
Arguably, that was what was powerful about the protests up in Bristol, in that it was the community saying, no, we don't want this, we're bringing this down. I think this element of discussion, this and also the pandemic in itself, are things that we haven't dealt with directly on this show, simply because at the time when it was happening, I kind of wanted to take a back seat on it and just see everything before committing anything to camera. But at some point, we'll probably have to investigate those two things with, you know, the information that we've had recently from Dominic Cummings being one of them. So yeah, there's a lot to be said on that. But yeah, if you haven't clicked like and subscribe, now is the time.
Yes, bingo card filled. Nice one.
Okay, I'm not quite ready to put this subject to bed just yet. There was another element that I was hoping we'd get around to discussing. I just wanted to kick it out there and see what you guys have to say about it. And it's the idea of how important paragons of justice are when we look at things like heroic narratives, and that contrasted with the idea of thinking for yourself, essentially. Like, how do we balance being shown who to be versus knowing how to make a correct moral judgment?
I think there's an element there of to borrow two very radically different quotes. One is that morality without context is like a fish without water, flaps around, doesn't go very far, and doesn't get you anywhere. Usually dies gasping. The other one is one of my personal favorites is Marcus Aurelius. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. It sounds very trite. It's very useful in all circumstances, but basically those two together, as you say, it's the volume of examples, the volume of stories, the volume of paragons of exemplars of virtue that matter. I mean, in this case, I'm bringing on Marcus Aurelius. He's a Stoic. He's one of the Stoics. And for Stoics, virtue is the only thing that matters. And they don't really prescribe any particular virtue for what is essentially almost a religion, but not quite. They don't spend any time telling you what is virtuous. They just tell you to do it, and they tell you how best to do it. Obviously, depends on who you ask. But for me, this is the thing that's always I found fascinating, is going back to the comic book thing, is that the archetypes are important. And, you know what each individual character might do in a certain situation. You know that Superman will probably do one thing. You know that Spider-Man will do another. You know that Punisher will probably solve all of his problems with bullets. And you know that they're all different reactions. They're all in the same context. They're all comic books. But over time, as a human being, you spot patterns and you take those frameworks and apply them to real life. And that is the only way, I think, to really teach people what is right and wrong. And even if that means, to use a sort of structuralist, postmodernist approach, that you are looking at morality through the lens of the culture in which you're in at that time. For comic books, that sort of classical liberalism, I think. I don't know how you want to look at it. It doesn't matter, because that's the only lens you've got. Like, yeah. Anyone?
I was mesmerized. That's all.
Yeah, I'm mesmerized as well. I'm happy just to be an audience member for some of this. To be honest, I think the last question that we have is where I'm going to basically really go for it. But for now, you've been quite, you've elucidated quite well what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's very astute to say that, because I remember a personal debate I got in a while ago, probably mid-pandemic, where the BLM protesters started breaking out in sort of a big way. And, there was a lot of kerfuffle around law and order versus justice and stuff like that. And it's just very interesting, the sort of conversations you get into there, where some people are very invested in the mechanics of government and the way the law is written, and that the law is the law and that's all that you have. And I think that can be quite a dangerous viewpoint, to just be like, well, you don't need to make your moral judgments based on anything but what is legal. I think it's a very difficult thing to grapple with, and I unfortunately failed in my quest to try and rationalize with this person, but I thought it was very important to say that what is legal today might not be legal tomorrow, and when it's not legal tomorrow, if that's the case, what do you do with all the so-called criminals who are imprisoned for the non-crime now that they have done? When you talk about
it's moral relativism. Is that the right word? Relativism.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? How smokers were everybody smoked, and now it's you're now it's almost criminal, and I'm hoping for the day when the people who are in cars get, as a cyclist, I'm hoping I can, when they go to jail, because they would treat me like such a criminal, and I'm like, no, man, ass power over gas power, okay? Sorry, go on.
That's a bumper sticker I'd have. I think if I may interject, I think there's, Matt, you raised a really interesting point, which is that, how do you define the letter of the law against reality? I think I've said before that, absolute justice requires absolute knowledge, and you can't have absolute knowledge. So can you have absolute justice? Probably not. No. I think the best the best angle of attack I've ever seen towards some kind of morality with a one rule is the late great Sir Terry Pratchett, and he once said that the root of all, to paraphrase, the all bad things, all evil begins with treating people like things. And anyone says it's more complicated than that is probably treating people like things. Slavery is treating people like things, but also robbing from people is treating people like they don't matter. Sexism is treating people like they're not people, like they're things. And the same with Black Lives Matter. That's a very gray area. It's hard to define where good and bad begin and end, because for everyone in that crowd, they're doing different things, they have different beliefs. But if you're the policeman clubbing someone down, because you got told to and you don't care why, that's bad. Likewise, if you're a looter robbing off someone, not considering that that's their livelihood, that's bad. I mean, if you're out there peacefully trying to make life better for everyone else, then you're treating everyone like they're people, not like things. So maybe that's where the good and bad is.
You could be stealing from Elon Musk, and that's good.
Well, once again, we're back at moral
redistribute the wealth. Taxes for Elon Musk.
But see, again, this is the thing, is like, you treat Elon Musk like he's a person. You go like, well, look, I don't think I want to defend robbing off of Elon Musk, but I can definitely defend taxing Elon Musk with that. To say, look, everyone here is a person. You're a person, you're earning stuff. You contribute to society. If you don't, you take your money and run. You treat all of us like we're things that don't matter. John's got something to say.
I'd say that what we've got to look out for is that essentially it's very easy to condemn the symptoms of a bigger problem. If we're going to say that, yeah, it's really bad that you're basically like looting a place, there is a reason why that might be happening within the context of a certain kind of movement. So just want to throw that out there. And also, in regards to what you're saying about morality, the people that you've quoted, they weren't living in a time where you could literally go on a march because of a war and say that you were a good person on Facebook, and then the next day just go about your life. The curation of your personality online has become for many people their life. It's not necessarily the truism of what they're doing when they're offline. Obviously, depending on what you've read and what you're into, it's very easy to find yourself within communities where that can happen quite easily. But because everyone's doing it, it's not necessarily a social crime, so to speak. We can talk about it here right now. Who knows what happens once somebody basically says that we should do this really good thing and they promote it? What do they do in their real life offline? So those people that you were quoting, I'm not sure if they could really, it's harder to apply that stuff now without thinking about the curation of a personality online. That's what I'm saying.
I wonder then, maybe if you should treat everybody as two people, the one that they are online and the one that they are in life.
Yes. Are you promoting my book for me? Because I was going to do a video.
That sounds, I don't get that.
Read the book now. Read it. Stop watching this. Read the book.
Oh, geez. What is this? Good morning, Britain.
I'm going to do a Pierce Morgan and throw a tantrum. I'm confused. I don't understand. Why wouldn't you treat someone online the way you would treat them in real life, with respect? And
I think what John is saying is that rather than to treat people differently in your actions towards other people online, I think correct me if I'm wrong, John. I think what he's getting at is that a person could express one set of virtues and do one set of things online, then put their computer down and go outside and do something else. So you could spend all your time online going, being
a troll.
One world, one people, I love hippies, crystals. And then you could go outside and then just, beat some people down in the street because they're, blue or whatever. It's totally possible. But then again, if you're going to act like two different people, then, your virtue as a person is based on what you do. If you act like two different people, you have two different sets of virtues.
So are you saying that some people think that when they're online, you're saying that some people aren't, when people are online and they're mean, they just don't think that's real because it's online. Is that what you're saying, Olie?
That's another aspect of this conversation. But to clarify, essentially, I could say, be nice to animals. I gave to this charity, you should do too. And then when I go offline, I don't necessarily follow through on that ideology whatsoever. So it's the whole idea of you being an actor in society and online being your personal space to curate that and keep that going, and essentially selling yourself to your friends, family, work mates, and other colleagues. So that's basically what I'm saying, that those ideas of morality, they don't necessarily have to always be hooked in. I think it was Adam Curtis who was saying that whole example I gave before. People would go on a march in the early 2000s because of the war, and the next day they basically just went about their lives. Whereas if you go back 40 odd years to when activism was really reaching its height in aspects of the civil rights revolution in America and also in the UK. And we could use other examples, but it was part of their life. Every day was like this struggle to make sure that what they were saying was going to change those laws that were actively, you know, curbing their creativity and sense of freedom.
I mean, I think we're right back on authoritarianism again now, in multiple ways, because from a personal standpoint, I see this sort of slightly narcissistic bent that we're discussing here of performatively being virtuous as a symptom of a kind of authoritarianism, being that we are all data points for these large social media networks, which is one of the most valuable commodities at the moment is personal data. So it's actively in their interest to encourage you to be online, to appear a certain way, to increase your social currency, and you get rewarded for looking like a good person. And I think it kind of takes the teeth out a little bit of the attempt to do activism, because it didn't used to just be AB marches, you know, like you look at, and this comes back around to the discussion I had with this person about the Black Lives Matter protests as well. If you look back at history, how did gay rights start? How did women's rights start? How did black rights start? They started with people chucking bricks, you know, like they started with riots. That's how the law changes. People get angry and they do something about it. You know, like I honestly don't see it any other way.
I have a question. Do you think that back in the day when those people were living their lives, and now it's just kind of like more like weekend activism, if you like to call it weekend activism, part-time activism, do you feel that as we are losing our liberties, as things are becoming authoritarian in this country, that, you know, I mean, I actually have this debate with my husband all the time because I'm a woman and I don't know if I want to be at the place where real revolution occurs and blood is spilled, because women are the first to get raped in these situations. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not, but at the same time, you feel like, well, we've just been living in some kind of, I don't know, rainbow capitalist bubble. Want to let that in for Matt? That's for you. No, but you know, like we're in this bubble. And it's like we're not taking what's happening seriously. And it's like, I feel like in the next year or so, are we going to see blood on the streets? Are we going to see serious revolution? Because things are going to get, I feel that they're going to get worse in terms of authoritarianism, in terms of, you know, people not being able to afford rent. These things are compounding in England. And we're not in the EU. We don't have the protections of a human rights bill either. We have a Tory government probably forever, and they're just going to keep doing worse shit. They've gerrymandered it so they can win. Keir Starmer is a wet fish, etc., etc. You know, is that because I'm scared I'm not sure I want to go out there with the brick. Because as a woman, I don't know, man. It's just, we don't do so well in these situations, but I feel that's where we're going. Does anyone else want to feel that way, or feel like we have to get like a blood needs to be spilled for things to change, or going to that situation?
Well, whenever like certain situations of comfort, relative ease, feel that they are in danger from the rabble, from the rousings of those who they've kind of put away in the background of their mind. Whenever they're worried and the police are worried and the government is worried, then that's when things change. So take it for what it is, really.
Do you mean like that protest bill that Boris Johnson's putting in to basically make protest illegal unless it's for right-wing British UKIP fuckwits to go out?
What I'm saying is when you have a situation, whether it be about gender or race equality or environmental concern, once it becomes rioting, that's when situations change. I'm basically saying exactly what Matt said. Your question is, will it kick off here in that way?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's something that we can easily answer with any kind of authority, because ultimately there's quite a few factors. I mean, if you look at where we were last year in terms of how people were talking about certain situations and where we are, where we are now, a lot of that conversation or activism has either gone one or two things. They've either, gone more offline and it's actually happening, or those who were basically like, using the aesthetic of being a punk have like, they kind of like found something else to do and talk about. I don't know if there's enough people that will get angry enough about it to do something about it on the level that you're concerned about, is what I'm saying.
I mean, I
feel that with Matt, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, all I was going to say is that I think we've kind of naturally segued into the next question to a certain degree here, because we are kind of discussing how we tell better stories, and is sort of, for want of a better term, revolution one of those better stories? And if so, does it have to be a violent revolution? Is an all-out bloody conflict actually going to make things better? And also, just to kind of personally answer your question a little bit from my standpoint, personally, I feel like we are maybe starting to enter that realm. Personally, I feel since 2016, we've kind of jumped into the beta timeline. Like, things are clearly going more and more crazy. We have, we've collapsed the quantum rate waveform and jumped across into a completely parallel reality now. That's how I feel. I think that the atomization we feel right now, especially because of the pandemic and the way our worlds have shrunken and gotten smaller, has made it harder to organize. But that, up against the lack of opportunities and the failing economy and stuff, it's going to create a real point of tension. And at some point, we're going to have to answer that question. So, that having been said, what do some better stories look like?
I want to jump in on this. I'll firstly add a little bit to what you just said. You're saying that we're in that kind of beta timeline now, and you think it's heading that way. For that to happen, you need proper coalition. And because of, dangerous extremist ideas on the left and the right, and what identity politics can do, I don't know if there's enough cohesion there for us to basically go, let's go forward, let's do this. Because the reason why Labour loses is because it is eating its own tail and it doesn't really know what it is. And that is symptomatic of a lot of, say, left-leaning, voices. It's good to self-analyze and figure out what you are. But if you're constantly like sniping at other people and not looking for the things that you have in common, I'm not sure how that really progresses the idea of coalition. But having said that, it's completely understandable why people would do that if they feel their voice hasn't been heard for so long. Your question was, what are the better stories to be telling now? And we talked about this off camera. There is a conceit in that question, which is something that, we unconsciously ask, what are the better stories that we want to be told? But who is the we? I mean, if we're talking about, say, superheroes, do I need to see another youngster in New York get powers and struggle to deal with that? I'd rather, as I said off camera, have a character who has powers, but they're in a part of the world where witchcraft is still something that's taken very seriously. I want that story to be told by someone that's from that community who can do it with a certain amount of justice. If we're going to have a sci-fi story dealing with, transgenderism, I don't necessarily need it to be something which is, again, from a Western perspective, because that Western perspective, it filters through all of these stories, even people that will come from these countries that want to become part of what it is that it means to be, like, say, a cosmopolitan citizen in, say, London or New York or Sydney, or even these other places where the Western idea is like really taken over. I don't know if we need more of that perspective. There's tons of it, so if we want more stories, I mean, open up doors or windows to other cultures using those ideas. Test yourself. And if you can't tell that story, then maybe you want to be part of being an audience member that supports it,
I have one positive story that I'd like to see occur for this revolution, basically. And I personally would say the Biden story is what the left needs here. Basically, we need somebody who can unite the left Now, I don't think that's Keir Starmer, like, at all, because he just wants to be in a center-right party. But I mean, Caroline Lucas was talking, I did an interesting article about this, you know, just she's written several, I think, about, but I just saw it not too while ago about how, you know, like in a certain place where somebody's not going to win, they won't run you know, they don't want to run a Green candidate or Lib Dem candidate or, you know what I mean? Because this is the only way that we're going to win any election here. And we need, you know, yeah, I'd say Biden or Jacinda Ardern. We need somebody who can do this here. And that may not be Labor. I'm thinking to myself, maybe it needs to be a coalition of, like, I don't know, Green, Lib Dems. I can't stand them, but maybe that's the only other alternative. Yeah, John.
Before, obviously, Olie will probably have something to say, or maybe Matt. To your point, you're saying that perhaps we need to have like another political party or a coalition.
We need a coalition. We need a coalition, and because Keir Starmer isn't. It's not gonna. I'm not voting Labor next election because my local MP isn't Labor anymore. Sorry.
What I wanted to say is that within the culture that sees, let's be honest, these other parties as like kind of sideline gatherings against the two like sides of like almost like a football match.
Yeah.
That really like truly, with all due respect, a realistic notion that there will be a coalition. I don't know if there's enough people that would understand that with all the histories of all these other parties of them coming together. There's just too much questions that I think wouldn't be answered.
I think that's true, but I think that's what we kind of need to do. Olie, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Olie,
yeah,
yes, you.
I've had sort of a reply to both you, Ola, and also to John's earlier point. First one is a bit more vague, and I apologize for diverting from the point of narrative so much, but actually kind of not when I think about it. The biggest problem, as you say, people need to unite the left. Well, okay. Well, the narrative of the left for the last 20 years has been, when do we want it? Now. What do we want? So they have no idea. There needs to be a story, to be an idea, an inspiration, a place to go, a story you can tell people.
I disagree. Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto was a very good idea, and it's been filched by Boris Johnson. Jeremy
Corbyn's manifesto was an excellent representation of socialism from the 70s. I like it. It's cool. There's some good ideas in there. You know, he was a kooky guy. But the thing is that, and what I'm saying is that, yeah, okay, a bunch of different policies, a bunch of ideas which are good is good. I like nationalising the train service. Thanks. I can't believe the Tories are going to nationalise the train service. Like Matt was saying, I feel like we're in an episode of The Travellers where everything's gone freaking wrong. So like, yeah, but a group of policies is not an ideal, is not an oath, is not something to strive for.
Yeah.
I think
upon a time there was a.
Yeah.
It helps, but it's not a thing. It's not a position. It's not I don't want to say ideology, but it's not an ideology. Yeah. Whereas you had communism and capitalism, there is no ism for the future that as yet we've found. That's not just a series of all right sounding economic adjustments. On top of that, we have an issue where the left and the right are basically irrelevant terms now, because they're economic terms of financial conservatism and financial socialism, socialist policy. Rich people share its stuff, you know, like, but that doesn't matter because people are divided down other lines now, lines of social stuff. The stories have changed. John?
Yeah, just a quick aside. Essentially, we have to look to the Blair era. We have to look towards the Clinton era, when you've got politicians that are using, they're figuring out what the people want and then trying to appease that rather than telling the people that, hey, we recognize this. This is our vision. You know, if you're constantly trying to figure out what they want, it's impossible to use what Adam Curtis was exercising in his documentary, Can't Get It Out of My Head, to use these, I can't even remember what you call it, but it was basically like rooms where they try and figure out what those people in the room wanted and therefore use that as a benchmark for what the UK wanted. And they took that, the Blairites era took that from the Clinton era. They thought that that seemed to be working for them. And if you're constantly being that kind of mishmash about what it is and not having an actual vision, then you're being dictated to in the worst possible way. It's almost like using X Factor principles. You know, it's almost like using a reality TV show to command reality. And so what do you get? You get shit. So, yeah.
Get shit. I think exactly what this is true. Bill Clinton used focus groups. That's how he got elected. Yeah, he did. But the problem is Keir Starmer's trying to use focus groups, but Biden didn't use focus groups. I mean, there are different circumstances, but he's giving people what they want for as long as he can until the Republicans take over in 2 years' time. But he's giving people what they want, really. And Keir Starmer is not giving anybody anything, really. I don't know what he's doing.
It's sad that it's sad that the principal form of press about Keir Starmer is basically, what the hell does Keir Starmer stand for? That's the thing. Like, literally, I have a YouTube video right here from TLDR.
Focus groups.
What the hell does Keir Starmer stand for? Yeah,
he is focus groups.
But I understand. The thing is, having done some research on the man himself, and especially his early career as a human rights lawyer and taken on, I think it was McDonald's and all that stuff, like McLawsuits. He seems to be a good person, right? Insofar as politicians can be measured. Why does he not stake his virtue in the ground as a flag and say, this is what I'm for? Don't focus group. You seem a decent enough guy.
I have a theory on this, but the difference between Biden and Keir Starmer's experience. Biden is a career politician that's been around a really long time, and he had a point where he was with Obama and they didn't go far enough, and thus Trump came into existence because they didn't go far enough, because the disgruntled poor went decided to embrace national. Yeah. And he had an experience, and he knows, you know what, I'm going for it. I'm not doing this bipartisan dance. I'm not doing this bullshit, blah, 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 blah. Keir Starmer became an MP 4 years ago, 5 years ago. He's like a fucking baby, okay? In terms of, and suddenly he's the leader of the Labour Party, and he's supposed to know what to do. I really don't think, and I think he has an agenda that is very narrow, and I don't think he has the knowledge or the experience to be a decent politician. I think this is the problem. John, you got something to say?
He's actually got, I'll agree with some of what you said. He's actually got a significant amount of clout when it comes to how he can deal with situations. The problem is that he doesn't have a vision, and he's afraid, because essentially, if he has a vision, it means offending people on one part of his party, right? He has to do that. That's what being a leader is. You can't do it so that everyone likes you. If you want to do that, then hey, maybe do reality TV, just to, hook us back into what we're saying before.
I think he's offended the left enough so they don't like him at all.
But the right don't think he's doing enough. So you see, he's not going far in either direction. Because he thinks,
it's true, but
like any lawyer, that if you basically fictionalize a certain amount of truth, then you can kind of control that fiction. But right now, the way people are intelligent enough to see through it, if he would have been a great leader for people, like say 50 years ago. Do you know what I mean? Because essentially then I think you had less people, that were voting, that were really cognizant about what actually was going on. That's
so are you saying that Keir Starmer's storytelling is it's for 50 years ago, and that's why he's not cutting the mustard? This is interesting. Speaking of stories and narratives.
There's quite a bit of hyperbole from me tonight. I'm sorry. But essentially, when it comes to Starmer, he thought, right, Corbyn basically was too far into the idea of being a socialist. What I'm going to do is I'm going to unite the party by not necessarily being about that, but then Black Lives Matter happened. And then, the pandemic happened before that. And he found himself having to do what I was trying to talk about before, but curating your personality. Sure, anyone in the public eye will have to do that. That's part of the fucking job. But if you're in a position of leadership in a political party, you can only do that so much before people think, hey, you know what, this guy, he doesn't believe anything. Like, Trump doesn't believe anything. It's just about him becoming bigger and greater so people can look at him. Boris, same thing, doesn't believe in anything. He just wants people to think of him as world king, right? I mean, he wanted to be that when he was 5 years old. Fair enough. I wanted to be an astronaut, didn't make it, but I'm not fucking over the UK because of that weird shit.
I mean,
base nonsense.
I mean, I think there's a fundamental problem.
Let's get that in there.
I think there's a fundamental problem with the way we look at governing as well, though. To come back to authoritarianism again, like, the UK is not a monolith, right? And I have a worry that we have a national reckoning on our hands in terms of what the English legacy is, right? Like, it's the reason why Black Lives Matter keeps coming up in the statues thing and all this bullshit, because it's like, you can't criticize England as a politician, and you can't be too pro England either, because they're two narratives that just don't gel together, and they are very difficult to resolve. And I think it's because there is a side that does not want to have the conversation that they've been having the luxury of having for a very, very, very long time, and they will keep pushing back on it until they're forced to reckon with it. I mean, personally, I wish I could say I think there's a way forward, but honestly, I think we're kind of straining the bounds of what democracy can do in the modern day. And personally, I would like to see like 50 more Colstons. I'd like to see people taking ownership of their own spaces rather than allowing it to be controlled by a government that doesn't represent them and by definition almost can't.
Just to offer some clarity on my last point before coming back to that, if you had someone like Starmer working on behalf of a political party in a pre-Nixon world, yeah, then he'd be fine, because we saw politicians in a very different way. Even though there was still a lot of rhetoric back in the day, it's like, we can't trust a politician. He says this one day, then he does this the next day. None of them were, you know, literally caught, well, not literally, but he wasn't caught with his pants down, you know. Bill Clinton, maybe pants is definitely something that came down. But what you're saying, Matt, in fact, you know, I've said enough. Olie or Ola, please talk about what Matt said.
Oh, I was very interested in that. Finish your thought.
I finished my thought on that, but in relation to what he said, I kind of want to give it to the rest of you.
I wanted to come back around to a point you made a bit earlier at some stage, but one thing I would say is, yeah, what Matt is saying is incredibly important, is the fact that British people, more than almost any other country in the world, are willing to foreclose on all conversation just so they can live in a myth. Like, they're happy to avoid all self-analysis just so they can live in a world of tea cakes and bunting and not worry about improving themselves. And that is cowardice of the highest order, and I'm not afraid to say it. I think it's shameful. But, like, I don't know if, like you say, I'm not sure if it's ever going to change. I think it might do. I think it might change with this generation where we are now. You see the rift between the old and the young, where the young are going, the hell, man? It's like the student riots in Germany in the 70s, where you've got everyone going, just talk about the real past, please.
Yeah.
But you never know. But one thing I did want to do, John, is go back to your point about narratives from other places in the world. That was one thing that taps on a thing that I find really fascinating as a avid reader and absorber of fiction, which is that everywhere in the world has its own version of what constitutes heroes, particularly superheroes. I find this fascinating. You know, we always think of superhero, we think of the American ideal, the, you know, Superman, Captain America, the overwhelming application of force to solve all problems without nuance. You know, like, you beat your problems into the ground in the name of truth, justice, in the American way. But that's not the only kind of hero that there is. There's the British hero, Sherlock Holmes, Doctor who solves all his problems with his brain and never rests. And to raise your fist for that kind of hero is considered like a failure. Or the Japanese hero, who is usually some guy who's working his butt off over and over and over, and possibly like speed eating ramen between each training session, you know, a la Dragon Ball Z or Naruto or My Hero Academia, or China, where, for instance, there's been a lot of movies for the kind of Confucian ethic, where you get, I think, is it The Wandering Earth? That was a Netflix film, right? where
A
it's a disaster
monkey.
movie about the apocalypse. And monkey, well, monkey's slightly different, but like you get like a thing about like the apocalypse where it's like, well, if we all work together, we can stop the apocalypse. And it's a movie about loads of disparate people working together. Yeah. So it's interesting. I think like we could do with stealing some of these character devices from other places in the world and putting them into a more familiar situation, you know, like, you know, to take the Japanese hero and put him in, say, the French thing. Oh, that was a good one. The French archetype of like the super rich debonair guy who's like always cool no matter what. Like if you put the Japanese hero in the French circumstance or the British hero in the American circumstance, the classic Doctor Who goes to the United States episode where he argues with the general about ethics or something. You know, that's a really interesting thing. I would love to see more of that. And
I think you've raised some really good points. I, for one, think that those ideas, it's not that we don't have access to them. They're in our pop culture. But if you look at the top of the tree, the major like players, you know, Disney and whatnot, they are fundamentally interested in the Americanized version of that hero. Even now with, was it Shang-Chi that's coming out? I'm hoping that they will be taking aspects from the culture that they're not infiltrating, but using to sell more lunchboxes to kids. But it could be just another Americanized version in disguise. Aspects of Black Panther were like that, you know. I'd like to see if they're going to have to stick to that mold, I'd like to see a superhero show where you're watching things from behind the eyes of someone who actually is propagated as the villain, like a Robin Hood character, yeah? Except that what they're fighting for is something that we can relate to in terms of our everyday lives. We haven't had something like that done within the modern context, I don't think. You know.
Mm. I mean, I think that's a really beautiful way of summing up the episode. I really agree that diversity of concepts and ideas is so key in terms of how we progress and tell new and interesting stories, and not even necessarily new. And the only reason they're interesting is because they haven't been told. You know, like it's the fact that, at least in the West, who we choose to represent, or even, you know, globally, just kind of this kind of melting pot idea of bringing diverse outlooks together. I think you always end up with a better result when you sort of bring in that rich diversity of cultural influences. So bring us along to the end. It sounds like we've definitely got enough here to do another episode at least. I think it'd be a good time to introduce everyone. Here at Rantbox, we don't tend to introduce everyone up front because we are more idea-driven than personality-driven. But now is the time for everyone to shine. So I'm going to start with you this time. Ollie, tell us what you do and who you are.
My name's, as you can see, Oliver Justly. I'm a music producer and a musician. I live and work in London. And yeah. This is me. I'm an avid absorber of culture and comic books and films and things like that.
Thank you very much. Ola, would you like to go next?
Sure.
Don't sound too enthusiastic.
No, that was me being enthusiastic. That was like cool, you know, like
too cool for school, man.
You know, like an American, like sure, man. Yeah, I'm O's Cool Kitchen, and I host a radio show as well as Rant on Here. And the radio show is basically because mainstream radio sucks and good music has no boundaries. And you can check it on Mixcloud.
Thank you so much. And finally, John, why don't you give us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. I want to say your introduction at the beginning was so smooth. I don't know if you noticed, but we were all smiling like, oh, wow, he's fucking nailing it. So just well done. So rewind and watch it now. Don't listen to me. Or if you're interested, I am John Clay. I did Rantboxtv. We started it like in 2020, myself and Deanna, and Alfredo was and still is our editor. I have a book, and I haven't actually spoken about it at all, really, you know, on Rantbox. So I'm going to do it today because the second edition is out, and thankfully, because of Matt, you can actually read it. So again, Matt, thanks for your technical skills. Awesome stuff. The book. It is about a character who has, and I haven't necessarily seen this in stories which involve superheroes, but they have issues regarding internalized racism. They have kind of fallen in love with the idea of what it is that they think they are in terms of their group, i.e. their sidekicks. It starts off with him being in a mental institution. And the reason why he's there is because he's basically gone into a certain kind of hiding. The characters that he basically has to combat can't find him there. And I won't tell you why, that's part of the conceit. But essentially, he is given reasons to believe that he has to break out and save the world. Where that actually goes, not a particularly great place, as you can imagine. So, Aww. Yeah, I know. It's definitely not, it's not a bedtime story for your 5-year-olds. There's stuff that happens in there that I shouldn't have read when I was 5, but did. You know, who else watched RoboCop at a stupidly young age, or The Fly? No one watched that shit when they reached 18.
I saw The Fly, the original Fly, not the Jeff Goldblum, the one where,
yeah, that was good. I like that. I love the second one. What I'm saying is I watched those films way too early. So imagine, like, because there was some metafictional content, but imagine someone having gone through popular culture in that way, gaining a certain amount of powers, and for that to be something that they have to deal with, as well as combating supposedly bad guys. So yeah, that's my plug over. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys. Check everyone out. I've been Matt Gaffin. I am, just to give you a quick thing, I front a punk band, and I've been overcoming a lost voice for like the past year, but hopefully I'll have an album out soon. Yeah, if you liked what you heard today, give us a subscribe either on YouTube or on your podcast app of choice, and hopefully we'll see you for the next one. Catch you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.